Hey, Big Mama. Hi. Just pouring my water. You did? Yeah. Oh, cool. Big Mama Lexi said she just got a notification. So I know she is subscribed. Hey, Nicole. Hey, Kathy. How about a couple of stories before bedtime? Are you, Nicole? That's awesome. Good. Thank you. I appreciate you so much. Hey, Linda. Sorry, I'm scratching my arms. Being out in the sun yesterday. Thank you, Denise. I think, I don't know, it just made him get all itchy and stuff on top of that sunburn. Hey, LMNW50, how you doing? Oh, okay, guys, let me find the story, okay? I know I have it here. Couple of short, spooky ones. Hey, girl, hey. Hey, girl, hey. Just a minute here now, ladies and gents. You guys ready for a spooky story? Hey, Davita, hi, Aunt She. Yeah, Davita, we want you to get better real soon. Okay. Yep, we're all praying for you, Davita. Hi, Kathy. I don't know if I said hi. Cross-eyed Betty, are you here? Hi, Linda Gelb. Miss you, Linda. Oh, okay, Kathy. Okay. I don't see Natalie, but I'll say hi, Natalie. Okay. The first one we're going to read is called Grin. I know, Linda, you always make me laugh. I thought you meant Nicole. But you know me, I had to still say that anyway. We've got to get our laughs, don't we? Any way we can. Okay, this one is called Grin, and it's got two I's in it. Grin. And here we go. And I'm going to try to read it all the way through without stopping or interrupting the story so people can really relax and enjoy it and fall asleep. The people that came out of Albie's wardrobe at night were real. They did not care if his parents assured him that they were not. They would come either way. It had been 3 months since Albie's parents had moved him away from the city and his friends to live in the village of Grinwood, closer to his elderly grandmother. The detached house boasted 4 bedrooms and a large garden. It was a considerable upgrade to their terraced hobbit hole on the outskirts of Brighton. On moving day, Albie had been the first in the door, weaving through an assault course of boxes left by the movers before pounding his way up the creaking staircase to the first floor. He claimed the first bedroom he discovered as his own. It was large, well lit, and finished with a thick pile carpet. The somewhat misted window offered the views of the private cobbled street below. An expanse of scrupulously trimmed hedges and expensive cars stretched as far as the eye could see. Beyond that, just out of sight, were the woods that surrounded the village. But the best part, Albie's new bedroom came with a built-in wardrobe. Albie had never owned a wardrobe, and this one was almost 6 foot wide and stretched from floor to ceiling. He felt giddy with all the potential that came with it. He could build toy dungeons or the ultimate hidden fortress where he could live out vast fantasy worlds. It would be a great place to hide things, too, should he ever need to. It was also a great place for things to hide. After the first month or so of the quiet country lifestyle, the house began to feel a little more like a home, and Albie's parents seemed to become happier in each other's company. Albie sensed they had not been this happy together since before his older sister Molly had the accident. At the age of 13, Albie had already outlived his sister by 2 years. Now, Molly had become very sick after a horse riding accident. She had fallen off a Spanish mare during a charity ride and landed badly on her neck. Albie's parents had told him that his sister was sleeping in the hospital until she got better and that they would take him to see her 3 times a week. He brought her flowers and get well soon cards and lots of cuddles. She looked peaceful, he thought, as if she could open her eyes any minute. If it weren't for all the tubes and the misshapen lump down the left side of her neck, Albie wouldn't have believed there was anything wrong with her at all. But despite her appearance and the doctor's encouraging attitude, Molly never woke up. She choked on her tongue without waking 3 weeks into her stay. It started with the crinkly man. He was all bad smells, jittering limbs, and raspy breaths. The worst of them, sure. But he would always leave when Albie turned on the light. Then a few nights later, there came a young, skinny girl in a blue summer dress, her tears reflecting the soft moonlight that seeped between Albie's mismatched curtains as they tracked down her porcelain cheeks. The skinny girl would never speak, merely stand by his bed and watch him. Then last month, on Christmas Eve, Santa Claus had crept from the darkness beyond the slatted doors of Albie's wardrobe, only he wasn't really Santa at all. And when Albie had woken to him standing over his bed, brandishing a bloodied burlap sack, he had screamed so loud that half the neighborhood had turned up on their doorstep, fearing something terrible was happening. A little over a week ago, Albie awoke to a weight pressing down at the end of his bed, a heavy sense of dread following him out of a dream he was already forgetting. Excuse me. The two bright green digits on his alarm clock read 3:30. Albie extended a shaky hand toward his bedside lamp, hoping the unexpected light would scare away whatever had been watching him sleep when she spoke his name. His first instinct was to turn on the light regardless, to scream and shout and run. Run. Somehow, he was able to ignore the cries inside his head and keep himself under control, retracting his hand from the light cord, but keeping it nearby should he need it, as he propped himself up on his pillows. His sleep-riddled eyes had almost adjusted to the smothering darkness of his bedroom. No doubt it was his sister, but she left soon after, telling him not to be afraid of the others, that despite their appearances, they meant him no harm. From that night on, they started to come more frequently, each arrival announced with a sharp flash of blue light. Despite his sister's reassurance, they were no less terrifying. Albie was unable to resist scaring them back into the wardrobe as quickly as they came. Most of the time, his screams were enough to make them leave, but not always. The crinkly man seemed to like it when he screamed. The only way of getting rid of him was to turn the lamp on. He would shrink between the slatted doors before Albie could ever get a proper look at him. The light would have to stay on for the rest of the night, though, or he would come right back. Leaving the room, while the best scenario was the last resort, it meant he would have to get the bedroom door without them getting him, and he was sure they would. After 2 weeks of their son crawling into bed with them, Albie's parents had installed a straight bolt to the outside of his bedroom door. Their impatience had its limits. Albie awoke to the smell of rotting flesh. It was a scent he had become all too familiar with, but not one he would ever get used to. It reminded him of rotten cabbage and gone-off eggs, and left a garlicky taste at the back of his throat. He was not a fan of garlic. He immediately reached for his lamp and flooded the room with light, then pulled his covers up to his nose, burying his nostrils in the meadow-fresh fabric to lessen the stench as he peered wide-eyed at the built-in wardrobe. To his horror, there came a series of crinkles, as if something were balling a thick sheet of plastic. As the sound grew louder, Albie felt a cold sweat break out across his brow. This was not how it was supposed to work. They were supposed to leave him alone when he turned the light on. He pulled the covers the rest of the way over his head as the wardrobe doors opened with a slow, taunting squeal. He pressed his eyes shut and told himself that it was not real, that it could not be possibly be happening. They were cheating. Damn it. Damn it. The crinkling grew louder still. He would not shout for help. He refused to. He knew the crinkly man would like that. There was a gentle tug at the bottom of his covers, lifting it ever so slightly to expose his toes. Albie responded by clutching his end so hard that his nail drew faint half moons on his palms. He caved, shouting, "Leave me alone." The tugging stopped. The covers fluttered silently back down to the mattress, and for a moment he thought that perhaps he was alone. Then his last layer of protection, however useless in reality, was torn from his grip and flung across the room, landing across the back of his swivel chair. Open your eyes, the voice sounded like gravel drawn across a cheese grater. Come on now, be a good sport. Albie felt warmth spread below him as his bladder gave out. The smell of the crinkly man's breath was unbearable. He rolled onto his stomach and buried his head under his arms. Something thin, bony, scratched at his spine throughout his moist pajama top. Too much, too much. Mom, he screamed. Dad. Yes, the voice said. Scream for help, boy. You and I both know no one will come. Albie reached blindly for his bedside table, fumbling for something he could use to defend himself. A glass of water was knocked to the floor, shattered into 3 pieces. The crinkly man let out a whooping howl as he reveled in the boy's panic. But Albie's alarm clock cut it short as it collided with his forehead and knocked him backwards into the desk. But the crinkly man was back on him like a fly on poop, But they didn't use that word. Albie's shoulders shrieked as he was wrenched over onto his back by a pair of clawed hands. The smell had a physical weight to it. Something warm dripped onto Albie's forehead. His eyes were forced open. The crinkly man was far worse than Albie could have imagined. Before he had been but a vague shape in the shadows of his bedroom, barely discernible in the glow. But now, exposed in the full glare of lamplight, Albie saw the crinkly man in all his glory. Each individual limb was wrapped tight in black bin bags, pinched off and secured at either end with a mess of brown tape and frayed rope. His torso was bare, pale, and bloated. Large chunks of flesh were missing in several places, hacked away to expose blackened organs and twisted innards. Ugh. His head, also wrapped in black plastic, had a small hole torn over the right eye and another over the mouth, which was leaking thick globs of saliva straight down onto Albie's face. The freak looked as if he had been dissected and then put back together haphazardly by a child who had no idea how human anatomy worked. Nothing seemed to fit together right. Albie felt blood rush to his cheeks. His chest hurt. It hurt bad. His breath caught in his throat. He could not move. He could not speak. Everything went black. When Albie came to, the crinkly man was gone. He wondered, prayed it had all been a terrible dream. And yet his Spider-Man duvet hung limply from the back of his swivel chair, and his alarm clock still lay broken in a jumble of wires and plastic on the carpet. He realized that he must have fainted and rubbed his temples to stifle the headache sprouting sharp tendrils throughout his skull. It's going to be okay now, a voice said. Albie sat up slowly. Molly? Molly sat cross-legged at the end of his bed, a pale hand resting on each knee. We told him to leave you alone. I think he'll listen to us for now. She stood and dusted off her hands in a job well done gesture. We? Albie asked. The wardrobe door creaked open. Albie tensed, every nerve in his body charging up for round 2. But it was not the crinkly man. It was a police officer? The man in the police uniform tipped his hat to Albie, and offered a reassuring smile. I know a way to stop him from ever coming back again. The others, too, he said. A sly grin passed between him and Albie's sister. Albie leaned closer, willing to do whatever it took to rid himself of the nightly terrors. When the police officer finished, Albie said, "Then it'll be just Molly and me? Can you help me?" "We can't help you, silly." Molly shrugged. "They will know." Albie rubbed his head. Clumps of fine blonde hair stuck to his sweat-soaked scalp. The angry tendrils were spreading, threatening to constrict his brain. He suddenly noticed how groggy he felt. It was almost as if he were a specter floating above the scene, playing out before him. Was this a dream? "If you promise," he croaked, "promise." The officer extended a hand toward him, which Albie shook. It was as cold and clammy as his pajamas. An hour later, after a shower and a change of sheets, Albie was confident he was about to get the best sleep he had had in months. He had done what the officer had asked of him, and already the entire house felt more relaxed. Molly had helped him with this problem, as she had always done when she was alive, and now it would be the two of them against the world. As he turned off his lamp and settled into his freshly made bed, he was smiling. He fell into a deep sleep within minutes. Something was wrong. Albie had no idea what the time was. He was already regretting using his clock as a weapon, but he could tell it was late. The street lights outside were no longer caressing his curtains with yellow light, and the world beyond his open window was deathly quiet. I'll get another drink. Because it's dark in here, Snow. Life in the village was calmer than the hectic hustle and bustle of the city. Still, it was not without its ambient noises, the rustle of small creatures as they passed through the flower beds beneath his window, planes passing overhead, and the comforting sound of crickets usually filled the air, replacing the car horns and the angry shouting he had grown up with. Tonight, though, there was nothing. Okay. The wardrobe door creaked open. Albie watched the short figure emerge from where he lay, relaxed. "Hello, Albie," she said. Albie reached for his lamp once again. Clicked the button. The room remained dark. Clicked it twice more. Nothing. "Molly?" A rich ocean blue light began to radiate from the back of Albie's wardrobe, swirling gently in an almost hypnotic pattern as it spread a soft, calming glow across every surface in the room. Molly was standing next to his bed by his pillow. Albie sat up, noticing his headache had passed. The twisting shadows created by the curious light made her features appear to shift around her face, unable to decide where they belonged. "You did well, little brother. I have to admit, I wasn't sure you had it in you." Another two shapes materialized from the blue light and joined his sister next to the bed. "Well done, Albie. We're very proud of you," his mother said, as she put one arm around Albie's father and the other across Molly's shoulders. Their faces, too, appeared to be deviating from their usual compositions. 3 Picassos. And what was that god-awful smell? The crinkly man appeared a moment later and stumbled up next to his family like a broken marionette. A thick mass of saliva immediately started to soak into the carpet between his plastic-wrapped feet. "Well done, boy. Now you must join us too," he rasped, his single wide eye boring a hole straight through the boy on the bed. Albie shuffled away until his back was up against the cold wall at the back end of his mattress. The skinny girl in the blue summer dress appeared next. As expected, she simply watched him. Albie began to weep silently, expecting the not Santa with the bloodied bag to step out from the shifting blue light next, but he did not. Instead, the 5, already lining his bed, took a step toward him. "What do you say then?" the crinkly man rasped. "There's no need to be afraid of me anymore. We're going to have more fun than a kitty at a catnip convention." One by one, each of them began nodding, broad smiles warping across their sinister faces. "Leave me alone," Albie screamed. "I want you all to go away." They did not. Instead, heads still nodding, their bodies began to spasm from head to toe. Within seconds, every one of them was shaking violently. Ghostly shadows danced in the light as arms and legs flailed wildly, knocking pictures from walls and a bookshelf lined with action figures as they bumped into one another. Their limbs began to wither, shortening as they were sucked inward until nothing was left but 5 floating torsos topped with shuddering, smiling heads. 5 bowling pins lined up for the strike. But Albie was ballless, his body frozen as it tried to decide what to do. It was then that Albie noticed something he had never been able to see before, always at the wrong angle, intentionally and cleverly disguised. The torsos were not floating at all. Each of them was controlled by a long, fleshy-looking stem that fused into a singular trunk-like arm further back before disappearing into the blue light at the back of his wardrobe. Gradually, the branches, unsure of what to call them now, moved back toward the closet, giving him a little room to make his move. "What the heck?" He scooted to the edge of the bed, tears streaming down his puffy cheeks. He risked a peek between the wardrobe doors as he passed, and immediately wished he hadn't. A second set of stem torsos were retracting into themselves. This seems really dumb. Bunched together against the left-hand wall. On the far left was the not Santa, then a pair of twin boys wearing striped shirts and red baseball caps, their mouths chattering in unison. Next was the police officer that had come with Molly, and he could not make out the one on the far end. The face was shifting too violently, but it looked as if it was wearing face paint, possibly a clown. The fleshy roots of these also connected and formed a thicker arm further back. The trunk arms parted wide as the 2 sets of juddering torsos burst forth from the wardrobe, hooking onto the walls of either side and forcing Albie to throw himself to the floor to avoid getting crushed. A shrill squeaking sound exploded from the blue, blowing Albie's bedroom window out and conducting an impromptu orchestra of car alarms several streets over. Albie screamed. His curtains billowed as a cold wind rushed into his room. He threw himself past the giant arms, terrified, yet unable to resist another peek at whatever was making that awful noise. Hi, Annie B. Hi, Denise. Hi, Element. Nightmare. Hi, Juju Bees, my sweet friend. A colossal body lined with dozens of concentric rows of sharp, shark-like teeth was hauling itself from inside the blue light. Whichever god had a hand in creating such a monstrosity clearly ran out of ingredients after making the mouth. How long is this one? I want this over with. This goes on forever. Oh, come on. This is really dumb. It goes on page after page. Sorry, guys. I can't. Yeah, this is. I don't want to read this. It's going on and on. It's supposed to be a short story. It's still going on and on. And it's like all the same stuff. Oh, this is dumb. Still going. This book lied. It said it was short stories. And they're supposed to be really good. Come, it's still going, guys. I'm going page after page. Sorry. Still going. It's all, come on. Really? Still trying to find a weapon, blah, blah, blah. The creature. Oh, gosh. Nope. It's still going. Going like this. It's going page after page after page. It's dumb. It's still going. I'm not for real. Finally. I don't know if I want to risk this next one. I'm going to just go back to my other book here that I usually read from on here. Sorry, guys. It did not look very good at all. The story. Really sorry. Okay. Let's go back to Campfire Tales. We have a couple more of those. Okay, here we go. Assassin. I'm not sleepy. It's just weird. It's dumb. Snow remover. I think it's more. It's just more on and on about that. I don't know. Sorry. Let's see if this is better. I'm going back to the other book, the Campfire Stories. assassin. Jean Claude was tying his cravat in front of the full length mirror, in his dressing room when he heard a knock at the front door. Hi, Karen H. It was a sheepish knock, so soft it could barely be heard unless one had extremely keen senses. Fortunately, Claude's hearing was supernaturally keen, as were his instincts. He looked up sharply, suspecting trouble. His dinner guests were not yet due, and he had heard no horse and carriage on the drive. Whoever was knocking must have walked. Jean Claude listened intently as his butler opened the front door and spoke to the interloper. He frowned and swiftly finished adjusting his cravat. He recognized the second voice as that of the chief constable, a man of humble origins and mean and intellect. He was stubborn as a bulldog with a bone, for all that, and therefore not to be underestimated. The butler appeared in the door of his dressing room. Chief Constable Jean Boucher, to see you, sir, Henry Deschamps intoned with a meaningful nod. Très bien, Deschamps. Please escort him to the study. I will be down directly, Jean-Claude said. Moving slowly to give himself time to think, Jean-Claude shrugged himself into his jacket and walked composedly down the grand staircase. Deschamps opened the study door, and Jean-Claude stepped inside. Chief Constable Boucher stumbled awkwardly to his feet, pulling off his cap. Chief Constable, bonjour. How may I be of service? Jean-Claude asked smoothly, moving with the grace of a striking wolf to the sofas grouped around the fireplace. He waved the police officer to a seat. I'm sorry to intrude, Monsieur Dubois, especially on the night of your dinner party, but it is my duty to investigate every detail of a crime, the chief constable said wretchedly, seating himself on the edge of the couch. Pardon, monsieur? I do not understand, Jean-Claude said, stepping to the drinks cabinet. Would you care for a drink? I'm going to get my drink. Can't drink when I'm on duty, Boucher muttered. None? Very well. Jean-Claude sank gracefully into an armchair. Perhaps you could explain what brings you here. Succinctly, if you please, Chief Constable. I have guests arriving for dinner in 20 minutes. It's about them 2 deaths out on the prairie, Boucher said. Father and son were both found with their throats torn out, 3 weeks apart. Folks say wolves done them in, but Madame Gagnier, the wife and mother, she is sure it was murder. She claims Monsieur Fontaine, a lumber baron who offered the family money for their land, hired an assassin to kill her husband when he refused to sell the property. After the father died, the lumber baron approached the son, and the son also refused to sell. Now both of them are dead, and the widow thinks she's going to be next. She's got some bee in her bonnet about the assassin being a loup-garou, that is to say, a werewolf. We've heard of this, haven't we? Our Foxy Bot would always talk about it. And I wonder how Foxy Bot's doing. Hope, anybody hear from her at all? See her anywhere? Foxy Bot, praying for you. Miss you. I have heard of the Loop Guru, Constable. I do not require a definition, Jean-Claude murmured politely. Do go on with your story. It's all nonsense to my mind. Everyone knows werewolves are just a fairy tale, Boucher said hastily. But Madame Gagnier insists I treat the killings like a murder investigation. She's been in my office every day for the last week to see what progress I've made. What with the deaths taking place so soon after father and son refused to sell their land, I thought it my duty to check up on them. It is laudable, Monsieur Boucher, that you take your duty seriously, Jean-Claude replied, but I am still puzzled by your presence here. What does this tale have to do with me? You have 10 minutes left. The chief constable gulped and said in a rush, someone told Madame Gagnier that the members of the Dubois clan are loup-garous. She has accused you, the head of the Dubois clan, of the murder of her husband and son. Jean-Claude threw back his dark head and laughed heartily. When he caught his breath, he said, a loup-garou? Me? Why, yes, Constable. I am a loup-garou, and so is my butler. And my cook is a zombie. And my cousin Claudette is a vampire. Really, Constable, you came all this way for a fairy story? Chief Constable Boucher turned bright red and stared at the floor. Then he stared up at the ceiling. Finally, he looked Jean-Claude in the eyes and said, I have to do my duty, sir. Where were you on the night of May 15th and again on the night of June 6th? I will have to check my calendar to be sure of my whereabouts on May 15th. On June 6th, I was here at home, entertaining the Duchess of Southbury, a distant cousin who was visiting from England, Jean-Claude said. She brought a large house party with her, at least 15 or 20 people. Any of them can vouch for my whereabouts. As for May 15th, he rose and went to his desk, inlaid with intricate patterns in dark and light-colored wood. He opened the top drawer and took out his calendar. Let me see. Ah, yes. On May 15th, I was in Montreal, spending the weekend with my Aunt Jessica and Uncle Claude. He showed the police officer the notation in his calendar. Do I, Annie B? I do. He will be more than happy to vouch for me. Outside, the thud of hooves and the rattle of approaching carriages herald the arrival of Jean-Claude's dinner guest. It was 1/2 the hour, time for this entertaining interlude to end. Jean-Claude rose, and the chief constable rose with him. I hope this talk has settled your mind, monsieur, Jean-Claude said politely. I apologize for intruding, monsieur, Boucher said, avoiding the question. Jean-Claude knew the chief constable still suspected him of murder. After all, the man was stubborn. We get one more drink. As Jean-Claude escorted him toward the servants' entrance at the back, Boucher said musingly, it's a funny thing, those deaths. Father and son both get their throats torn out by wolves, exactly 3 weeks apart. You must look for your mythical assassin among the wolf packs, Constable, said Jean-Claude, opening a side door for his unwelcome visitor. Boucher turned in the doorway and met his gaze. Jenny T1, I'm scared. Oh, thank you. That's funny. That's sweet. Thank you, Jenny. I intend to do that, Monsieur Dubois. Good man, Jean-Claude said. And now, farewell. Here's another illustration. Thank you again, Jenny. That actually scared me because that came up as a bright light, a bright yellow light. And I thought, oh gosh, what happened? Boucher excused himself and walked humbly, perhaps a bit too humbly, through the twilight kitchen garden toward the road. Jean-Claude watched until he was out of sight. The butler, Duchamp, materialized soundlessly beside his cousin and employer. Is Boucher going to be a problem? He muttered. Jean-Claude shook his head. Not at all. Nicole. Thank you. This is getting good. Everyone is asleep and I'm scared. Thank you so much, Nicole. You guys don't have to do that. That's really sweet, though. Thank you. Jean-Claude shook his head. Not at all. Show my guest into the drawing room and serve them drinks, please. Tell them I have been delayed by some unfinished business. Very good, sir, Duchamp said impassively. As he turned away, he added, Bon appetit. Love you too, Nicole. And all the ramblers. Yes. Great community. Well, let's see. Jean-Claude stepped out into the twilight and quietly closed the door behind him. He smiled, and his incisors lengthened. A loup-garou assassin, he murmured. He murmured as he loped after the retreating chief constable. What an imagination that poor man has. The words became a growl as Jean-Claude dropped to all fours and changed shape without missing a stride. He really loved his work. That was the end for that. We'll read another one or two because we haven't really gotten a good one yet tonight. The Seventh Window. Veronica hated her confined life. Her domineering father would not let her go to dances or introduce her into society. After the death of her mother, the dark-haired beauty became a virtual prisoner in her own home, attending to her father's every whim and listening silently to his nightly tantrums. Veronica's life was unbearable, and she desperately sought escape from the lovely mansion that was her prison. Escape came in the autumn of 1890, when the mysterious Mr. Rutherford began calling on Veronica after her father had retired to his rooms for the evening. Heretofore, she had only heard rumors about the rich, elderly miser. The people in town said he lived alone in a decrepit old mansion on the far side of town, with only one deaf servant to cook his meals and tend to his meager needs. Mr. Rutherford never came to town for any reason. His deaf servant did all his banking and shopping for him. Once a month, a mysterious shipment of unlabeled boxes arrived at the train station for the rich miser. The delivery man was instructed to take the shipment to the mansion and leave the large, heavy boxes on the stoop. The mansion door never opened while the delivery man was on the grounds. Folks in town frequently debated what those boxes might contain, but no one was invited into the mansion to find out. There's the illustration. Rice Krispie treats are great. Yes, Foxy Bot, wherever you are, we're thinking of you, praying for you, and want you to get well. Come back really soon. On his first visit, Mr. Rutherford stayed for a half hour and made small talk with Veronica in the approved society fashion. He was a tall, white-haired gentleman with a cultured voice and hard black eyes. His dark suit had a faintly chemical smell about it that Veronica found repellent. But he was the only suitor who dared brave her father's wrath. So what choice did she have? Once a week, for the next 2 months, Mr. Rutherford paid court to the lovely 18-year-old. The blue-eyed, dark-haired beauty used every wile at her disposal to attract the old man. So desperate was she for escape. Please, God, let him propose, she prayed each night. And propose he did, to her intense relief. Veronica's father was furious when he learned of her clandestine courtship. He threw her bags onto the lawn and locked the door behind her when her betrothed arrived to take her to their town hall wedding. Disowned forever, Veronica resolved to forget her old life as her bridegroom drove away from her former home. Veronica's new resolve was shaken when she caught her first glimpse of decrepit old Rutherford mansion on the far side of town. It was surrounded by a ruined hulk of a garden and bizarrely segmented, cracked brick walkways. Detritus was piled so high against the double front doors that the newlyweds were forced to enter the mansion through the portal at the back. Rutherford disappeared into the depths of the mansion without a word, leaving Veronica in the ruined back hallway with the elderly, deaf maidservant. Veronica almost choked on the horrible chemical smell that pervaded the whole house. The stale, dusty air made her sneeze, and her lovely blue eyes watered unattractively as she followed the maidservant through the worn-out hallway. They climbed a magnificent, cobweb-encrusted staircase and entered a large bedroom on the second floor. The servant dropped Veronica's bag beside the fireplace and withdrew, leaving the bereft bride staring at the tattered tapestries, the worn-out chair coverings, and the faded quilt on the large canopy bed that rose like a bier in the center of the room. When Veronica pulled aside the tattered bed curtains, she was suddenly enveloped by tiny white moths that fluttered sickeningly around her. Sickeningly. I can't even say it. She gasped and flailed at the creatures, their tiny wings brushing her face and neck like grasping fingers. The moths vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, and Veronica pressed a hand to her pounding heart, the chemical smell strong in her nostrils. All at once, Veronica's eyes focused on the large, faded bed she shortly would be sharing with her new husband. The idea made her stomach roil, and she lunged for the shutters that covered the window, longing for fresh air. I Jane, famous artist. Hey, Justin. But the window catch was rusted shut, and she could not open it. Defeated, Veronica turned back into the room. Her eye was caught suddenly by a large portrait hanging above the fireplace. A lovely blonde bride leaned her elbow against a marble pillar, her lovely cheek resting on her hand. Her bridal veil cascaded around her intricately arranged hair, and a marvelous necklace of rubies wreathed her smooth neck. Her free hand lay on the head of a large French poodle. Tiny white slippers peeped out from underneath her magnificent white dress. Veronica stared entranced at the portrait and then glanced ruefully down at her own wedding suit of conservative blue and gray. At that moment, a pair of folding doors on the far side of the room slid open. Veronica realized with a start that her bedroom must adjoin that of Rutherford, for he stood observing her from the doorway. If you would be so good as to join me, he said politely, supper is served. Veronica swallowed and nodded. She passed through the folding doors and looked apprehensively around her husband's apartment. Rutherford's room was larger than hers. It was quickly apparent that he spent much of his time there, for the room was a combination study and bedroom. Books lined two walls, and against the third wall stood a small dining table and a hideous iron stove. The bed, with its dusty spread and sagging springs, was relegated to a far corner, as if it was of small importance. The newlyweds sat in silence while the deaf maidservant served a mouth-watering meal. Veronica broke the silence to inquire about the fancy portrait above her fireplace. She was my first wife, Rutherford said abruptly, in a tone that brooked no further questions. Veronica gulped and thereafter stayed silent. When the meal was done, Rutherford stood politely and motioned for Veronica to go to her room. Let me get another sip. Hi, honey, hush. Veronica departed with a racing heart, aware that it was her wedding night and that she had married a man she did not love. The faintly sweet chemical smell assaulted her nostrils afresh as she entered her apartment. The folding doors closed behind her, and bile rose suddenly in her throat. Stomach churning, she was overwhelmed by a desire for fresh air. Veronica bolted for the hallway and ran down the stairs and through the decrepit hall to the back door. Veronica's hand was on the knob when the elderly maidservant appeared from nowhere and caught hold of her arm in a gentle but ruthless grip. Veronica stared at the blank-faced woman in sudden fear, and then she became aware of a clap of thunder overhead and the pounding of rain against the roof of the mansion. Wind shook the house from top to bottom as the maidservant withdrew, leaving Veronica alone in the storm-beleaguered hallway. Resigned to her fate, Veronica went upstairs and put on her nightgown. She sat by the fire to wait for the appearance of her new husband, breathing deeply of the dusty, stifling air inside the worn out room. Slowly, her dark lashes sank against her cheeks, and she fell into a deep sleep. In the early hours of the morning, Rutherford came silently through the folding doors, carrying a small flashlight and a tape measure. He regarded his sleeping bride thoughtfully as she lay in the chair by the flickering fire. Then he looked up at the portrait above the fireplace. He seemed to be making some kind of mental comparison between his former bride and the new one. Then he took the tape and began measuring his sleeping bride from head to hips, from hip to knee, from knee to toe, length of arm, length of feet, length of fingers, length of neck. He fingered a dark tress of her hair, as if assessing its texture. So light was his touch that Veronica never awoke. Hi, John. Measurements completed, Rutherford withdrew as silently as he had arrived. Veronica woke the next morning when the servant arrived with breakfast. She begged the maid to open the window, shutters to let in the fresh air. The deaf woman went next door to consult with her master and then silently returned to open the shutters. A moment later, Rutherford opened the folding doors. Veronica's heart thudded. Thank you, John. So sweet. Thank you. Victory. Thank you, John, so much. That's so cute. Thank you. Let's see. A moment later, Rutherford opened the folding doors. Veronica's heart thudded in belated panic. She had slept through her wedding night, and now her hour of wifely reckoning was upon her. But Rutherford merely inquired after her sleep and asked her to join him for lunch. Veronica's panic changed to puzzlement. It seemed her elderly husband did not wish a physical relationship with his new wife, and so it proved in the days that followed. Veronica took meals with her elderly husband, who then withdrew to his own pursuits, leaving her alone to read or sew. She spent a good bit of her first week wandering through the decrepit mansion. On the morning after her wedding, Veronica explored the dusty, unfurnished rooms with shuttered windows on the first floor. She found a stack of paintings in a corner covered by a dusty sheet, but none were as fine as the bridal portrait in her bedroom. The next day, she explored the unoccupied bedrooms on the second floor, but there was little to interest her, and she soon grew bored and withdrew to her apartment to read. On the third day, Veronica investigated the third floor. As she turned the corner of the third floor landing, she stepped into a sunbeam filled with hundreds and hundreds of white moths. They fluttered around her, suffocating her just as they had when she first arrived that first night. Veronica shrieked and batted at them, finally covering her head with her arms and fleeing upward to get away. As Veronica reached the top step, dry wings brushed her dark hair. Looking up, she saw a stuffed seagull hanging from a wire at the top of the stair. When she looked down the hallway, hundreds of glass eyes stared at her from every nook and cranny along its length. A stuffed fox sniffed the air. A red-jacketed monkey sat on a chair. An owl perched on a log. A cat lounged on a cushion. Everywhere Veronica looked, dead animals glared back at her. It appeared her new husband had a mania for taxidermy. Well, at least this explained the mysterious shipments that came each month on the train. Rutherford was obviously collecting dead animals to stuff. It was a revolting obsession, but there was nothing mysterious about it. At least it explained the moths. As the weeks passed, Veronica realized that she had replaced one form of captivity with another. True, her new husband did not scream at her, but she had no more freedom of thought and movement now than she had with her autocratic father. Less even, for she was rarely allowed to walk in the weed-choked garden. She spent her days reading books, wandering alone through the rooms of the mansion, and eating rich meals because her husband thought she needed fattening up. The maidservant spoke not a word to her new mistress, tending silently to her needs and appearing unexpectedly whenever Veronica wandered too close to her husband's taxidermy workshop. Although Rutherford never forbade her from going up to the third floor, Veronica sensed that her husband and his maidservant did not want her roaming there. As lonely month followed lonely month, Veronica realized she must escape her constricted life or go insane. She wanted to be free of the elderly miser who ignored her, free of this horror house with its dead animals and moths and dust, free of the maid who was more a keeper than a servant. But Veronica had no way of effecting her escape. The servant did all the shopping, so Veronica had no money. She was never allowed to visit the town, and where could she go if she ran away? Her father would not take her back, and she had no other family. One evening, as Veronica sat sewing by the fire, futilely running escape options through her anxious mind, her eye fell on the bride's portrait above the fireplace. She stared at the rubies adorning the throat of Rutherford's first wife and realized that those rubies must be someplace in this house. The miserly Rutherford would not have disposed of something so valuable. If she found those rubies, Veronica could go far away and make a new life for herself. From that moment, Veronica began searching the mansion room by room for the rubies. She would send the maidservant on long errands and then tap on the walls, look under furniture, and search in and around the stuffed animals that filled the third floor rooms. Veronica hated those animals, so full of dust and chemical smells. They felt so dead when she touched them, preserved for all eternity in a ghastly resurrection that felt beyond redemption. But she touched them anyway, for it occurred to her that a stuffed animal might make a good hiding place for the rubies. One evening, the maidservant was sent on an errand for her master. Veronica slipped into Rutherford's taxidermy workshop to search for the rubies and saw that Rutherford was working on a new project. The upper portion of a wax head sat on the workbench, its forehead and dark-lashed eyes already in place. The dark blue glass eyes struck a deep, negative chord in Veronica. A shiver ran down her spine as she gazed into the glass eyes, trying to recall where she'd seen them. The clock struck in the hallway, and she realized she was wasting precious time. the maidservant would return shortly. This might be Veronica's only chance to search the workshop. She turned her back on the model and hurriedly searched the room, racing away at the last minute when she heard the back door slam as the maidservant returned to the mansion. Later that evening, Veronica was taking a rare stroll through the ruined garden when she was struck by an oddity in the construction of the mansion's third floor. In her explorations, she had discovered 3 big rooms on each side of the third floor hallway. Each room had 2 shuttered windows. 3 times 2 made 6 windows, which were cut into the north and south sides of the mansion. So why were there 7 shuttered windows on the south side? Veronica counted the third floor windows several times, and each time she came up with an extra window. Veronica's heart pounded with excitement as she realized that the 7th window must be inside a secret room behind her husband's workshop. And therein, she was suddenly sure she would find the rubies. Over the next few weeks, Veronica slipped to the third floor whenever she could to search for the hidden room. She tapped the walls and pressed the molding and inspected every inch of the hallway in the workshop. She was about to give up in despair when her questing fingers found a flexible place in the molding at the far end of the third floor hallway. When she pressed it, a panel slid open, revealing a large metal door with a combination lock. Hearing footsteps on the staircase, she hastily pressed the molding again, and the door slid shut. She hurried to the sniffing fox and stood inspecting it as the suspicious maidservant entered the hall and beckoned to Veronica. That night, Rutherford called for wine to be served with dinner. They never drank wine, and Veronica eyed its appearance with suspicion. "Do you know what today is?" her husband asked in an unusually jovial tone. Veronica shook her head. "My dear, it is our anniversary." Sorry about that. "My dear, it is our anniversary," Rutherford said. "We should drink to our happy union." His eyes were bright with anticipation as he poured red wine into her glass and then fixed himself a tonic and gin. "To us," he said, raising his glass. Then Rutherford's left arm jerked, and the glass fell out of his hand, shattering on the floor as he clutched at his arm. A moment later, he toppled over, dead of a heart attack. Veronica leapt to his side, but it was too late. She stared at his lifeless open eyes, so much like those of his stuffed creatures. Then Veronica called for the maidservant and sent her to summon the doctor. In the hubbub that followed, the nuptial glass of wine stood forgotten until the maidservant found it the next morning and poured it out. It wasn't until her husband's body was carried away that Veronica realized she no longer needed the rubies. She was a rich widow, and the whole estate was hers to do with as she pleased. After the funeral, Veronica pensioned off the maidservant handsomely for her years of service and sent her away. Then she put the house up for sale and prepared to move to Richmond to start a new life far away from the old. While cleaning out her husband's rooms, Veronica found a lock combination hidden inside an old-fashioned pocket watch. 24 left, 5 right, 16 left, 9 right. It was then that Veronica remembered the secret door and the missing rubies. She had been so busy with the paperwork and her husband's funeral that she'd forgotten them completely. Overwhelmed by a sudden desire to find those amazing rubies and take them to Richmond as a reward for her year of misery, Veronica went to the third floor and entered the combination into the lock on the secret door. When she opened the door, Veronica was overwhelmed by the chemical smell in the room. It was even stronger than the smell from her dead husband's workshop. No light came through the shuttered seventh window, so Veronica fetched a lantern from her husband's workshop. As she re-entered the secret room, Veronica gasped in astonishment. The lantern illuminated a life-size replica of the bride's portrait from her room. It was a magnificent painting, more finely detailed than the smaller portrait. Gradually, Veronica's wonder turned to unease. Something wasn't right about the picture. A shudder crept across her skin, and cold beads of sweat formed on her arms and neck when she realized that the scene in front of her was three-dimensional. A shadow flickered underneath the white French poodle, and the light glittered off the rubies at the bride's throat. Veronica swallowed dryly and reached out her hand. Her fingers touched glass. Horror overwhelmed the new widow as she realized what she beheld. Mr. Rutherford's mania for taxonomy had driven him over the edge of sanity. Here, preserved in chemicals and glass, was the murdered body of his first wife. A memory flashed before Veronica's inner eye. Once more she saw the partially completed wax head with the dark-lashed blue eyes, and she realized those blue eyes were hers. "No!" Veronica screamed, lashing out blindly with the lantern as she envisioned her own body preserved inside the life-size glass box. The sharp edge of her lantern struck the case, and the glass shattered inward, coating the bride and the poodle inside the box. As fresh air hit the corpse, the wedding gown crumbled to dust, leaving a bare skeleton seated beside the marble column. The sparkling red rubies around her throat were the same shade as the poisoned wine Rutherford had poured into Veronica's glass on the night of their anniversary. The end. Okay. Sparkling red rubies around her throat were the same shade as the poisoned wine Rutherford had poured into Veronica's glass on the night of their anniversary. Okay. That one was kind of good. Karma got him. Okay, y'all, thank you so much for coming and listening. That one was pretty good. Found a good one, at least one tonight, right? Thanks, guys. Love you guys. See you next time. Don't be too scared. Bye, guys. Thank you. Leslie.